back to another episode of Web3 Deep Dive Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Wolfson. Today, I'm so excited to be speaking with Chris Maurice. He is the CEO and co-founder of Yellow Card. In this episode, we're going to be speaking all about stablecoins in Africa and how stablecoins are being used in emerging markets. Super interesting stuff. So be sure to stay tuned for the entire episode. Before getting started with today's episode, I'd also like to take the time to thank House of Web3 and Edge and Node for letting me film today's episode at this beautiful podcasting space in San Francisco. I also want to take this time to thank the sponsors behind Web3 Deep Dive. Scroll is the leading zero-knowledge rollup. Designed by developers for developers, Scroll's bytecode level compatibility makes building on it just like building on Ethereum. Open source and community-driven from day one, Scroll's developer ecosystem is the fastest growing among ZK rollups, with over 2,400 active developers monthly and globally. Committed to shaping a more scalable Web3, Scroll is the future of Ethereum. Okay, without further ado, let's get started with today's interview. Hey, Chris, how's it going?
It's going so good. There's nowhere I'd rather be, so.
Yeah, well, I'm so happy to have you here today on the Web3 Deep Dive podcast. We met last week in person in San Francisco, and I was so blown away by your story that I had to have you on the show.
Yes, well, next time we'll do it in person, but this is a close second.
Definitely. So Chris, before getting started, maybe tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. You are the CEO and co-founder of Yellow Card, correct?
That's what I've been told. CEO, co-founder of Yellow Card. We're the largest stablecoin on and off ramp on the African continent. So we operate in 20 countries all across sub-Saharan Africa, and essentially make it easy for people to be able to go from local currency into the Web3 space and vice versa.
Wow. Okay. Now you have an interesting story. So I kind of want you to start from the beginning. Why did you start Yellow Card? Like, how did all of this unfold?
Yeah, I met a Nigerian man on the internet that told me to. I don't really know what's so interesting about that, but yeah. So I think I'll make a long story medium. So one day I was at a Wells Fargo in Auburn, Alabama, of all places, the capital of innovation, and met this Nigerian guy in line who was sending $200 to his family, and the bank charged him $90 to send $200 over. And I thought, well, that seems insane, right? And so I talked to this guy, hey, if you heard of Bitcoin, it's free, it's instant, it's fun, all this great stuff. And went home and just started thinking, what's this guy's mom going to do with $200 of Bitcoin, right? Like it solves the middle of the problem, but then, you can't buy food with that. You can't pay rent with that. What do you actually go? I feel like I need to clarify. Usually when I meet strangers at the bank, I don't spend the rest of the day thinking about their mom. But this was sort of a unique exception, right? And so I just became so obsessed with this problem, right? And I find myself skipping class and doing all this research and just trying to understand the currency, the economy, the country, the continent more broadly, right? Just how is it possible that it could cost that much, right? And, while doing that research, I realized if I really want to understand Nigeria, I need to speak to somebody from there. And so I put out an ad online that said, looking to speak to Nigerian men, which, in hindsight, probably could have been worded better. But I got exactly what I wanted, which was, a lot of Nigerians to talk to. And I met this guy, and this is about the point in my life where I learned that Nigerians are the most convincing people that you'll ever meet on the face of this planet. Because within about a month and a half of meeting this Nigerian man on the internet, he convinced me to go get a passport and take the first international flight of my life. So I'd been on a plane 4 times in my life at this point, and I land in Lagos, Nigeria on a 6-day-old passport, no visa, no shots, and a one-way ticket that I spent all of my money on. And so, yeah, that was, sort of how we got started. It was a real trial by fire. It was either, make it or live in Lagos for the rest of my life. So.
Got it. So you get to Africa, and then did you start Yellow Card there, or how did all this get created, I guess?
Yeah, I think the big thing that we realized there is because look, going over it was to solve this problem, right? Why does it cost $90 to send 200? And I think the big thing that I learned very quickly is the world doesn't need another remittance company, right? There's 7,000 ways to send money from point A to point B. Everybody can download 6 of them on their phone in the next 5 minutes and send money and do all of that, right? The problem is not sort of it's not like a legacy fintech problem, right? There are sort of solutions out there. The problem is still the cost, right? How do you actually make these rails more efficient rather than just making them more convenient? And so started looking into that, and I think the big thing that I realized, look, I've been in crypto since about 2013. I got in really early, and so I've been fully down the rabbit hole since about 2015. And so, I knew that there had to be some solution that involved the space, right? There's some solution here that involves crypto, that involves blockchain technology, that involves stable coins, right? You hear all the time about everything that this technology is going to do. And then, everybody is just kind of trading dog and cat coin back and forth, right? And so it's like, well, where, like, how does it solve this actual problem? And the big thing that that I realized is, well, if you want to solve this problem, you need a way of actually interacting with the space, right? If I live in Nigeria, if my whole life is denominated in naira, how do I actually interact with the space? How do I buy Bitcoin? How do I buy USDT, USDC, stable coins, etc.? And so that was what we set out to build. We set out to solve that problem of the access, the sort of first and last mile, so to speak, so that people could actually use this technology in all of these different ways, right? People can build their own solutions on this technology once they have that access to it.
Right. So Yellow Card app allows small businesses in Africa to transact using stablecoins to solve the problem of the high fees that would normally be associated with transactions in that region, right?
I wouldn't say small businesses because we work with, everybody. We work with the whole gamut, right? Everybody from, a guy that sells shoes on the side of the road all the way up to some of the largest manufacturers and production companies on the continent. And everybody in between, banks, financial institutions, you name it. And so, yeah, essentially what we do is we enable these companies to be able to make those international payments that they otherwise wouldn't be able to in the traditional financial system, right? Look, I think to back up a little bit, right? When you look broadly across the continent, 70% of African countries have declared an FX crisis, right? As in, the shortage of dollars has gotten to the point where it has been declared a crisis. And dollars are extremely important, right? The dollar, look, I know there's probably a bunch of Bitcoin people listening to this right now that don't want to hear this, but the dollar is still the world reserve currency today, right? It is still extremely important in international trade. It's important in, basically anything that crosses a border, right? Nobody wants monopoly money, aka the euro, and so it's all the dollar that's doing this. And so when you look at what's going on, you're talking about countries that are very import dependent, right? There's still not a lot of industry going on natively on the continent, right? There's a lot of raw material export, there's a lot of oil export, things like that, but there's not a lot of sort of finished goods production. And so there's a huge demand for imports. Well, at the same time, you have this crisis and shortage of dollars, right? And so what you're left with is a situation where these companies that rely on these imports, that rely on being able to bring in consumer goods, food, medicine, other products that people need in their day-to-day lives, don't have access to the hard currency, the dollars that they need to be able to actually facilitate these transactions and bring in food, bring in medicine, bring in other consumer goods. And so, stable coins, look, Bitcoin, it was Bitcoin up until a point, and we could talk about sort of the African transition from Bitcoin into stable coins, but now it's really stable coins. Stable coins have emerged to solve this problem, right? It's a technology that actually allows people to access and utilize dollars in a way where they're not limited by shortages locally. And so that's essentially what we do, right? Is we provide these companies of all shapes and sizes with access to USDT, USDC, PYUSD, et cetera, so that they can actually facilitate these imports, bring in the food, the medicine that they need to keep the country fed, keep the country healthy, and bring in consumer goods as well, right? It works the same way on the other side. These companies that need to pay employees locally, right? People that are working with freelancers all over the continent, payroll, payments, remittances, et cetera, right? Need a better way of getting that money into the country, right? It's there's a much faster and cheaper way than these apps that are out there, and then paying $90 to send 200. And so stablecoins have taken on that that life on the continent.
Right. And just to clarify for listeners that don't know what a stablecoin is, those are just like a form of cryptocurrency tied to the US dollar. Is that a fair definition, Chris? Like, how would you define
Yeah,
stablecoins?
you nailed it. I mean, I think stablecoins more broadly, I think, can define any token that is pegged to an asset, right? However, I think when people talk about stablecoins, they're talking about US dollar pegged stablecoins, right? USDT and USDC make up, I mean, USDT is what, 130 billion out of 170 billion total market cap for stablecoins, right? So it's predominantly US dollar pegged stablecoins.
Right. Can you explain why stablecoin transactions are um, easier than sending US dollars in Africa? I mean, like maybe the technology side of things. Why is that the case? And on using Yellow Card.
Yeah, it's purely the technology, right? This is the power of blockchain, right? Is if I want to send you money, right now we're sitting several thousand miles apart, and I could send you, $5 in 2 seconds, and you would get it on your phone, and you have that now, right? And so I mean that's the power of stablecoins, right? It exists outside of any traditional financial system where there need the need for intermediaries, the need for all this other stuff, right? It all goes back to blockchain technology, right? Blockchain is what's really solving these problems. All these various tokens and stable coins and everything are just applications on this technology.
Definitely. So it's interesting. Can you talk about how many people are using Yellow Card app just so we can get an idea of like the difference that this is making in emerging markets?
Yeah, I mean, we've worked with almost 2 million individuals when we used to, really push out on individuals, and then we've worked now with over 30,000 businesses. And so, I mean, yeah, we're serving, again, 20 countries, all in sub-Saharan Africa, sort of large swath of the population, and economic, how do you say, economic activity on the continent, right? And so, yeah, I mean, these are large businesses, small businesses, banks, guys that sell shoes on the side of the road, food sellers, everything you can imagine, right? I mean, this is, again, I think, people talk about the applications of this technology a lot more than you actually see the applications of this technology, right? I think that it's one of those things. I can't actually think of a technology more than like crypto and stable coins and all of that, where there's so much more talk about practical use cases than there are examples of practical use cases, right? And I think that's really what we've built, and that's what we've shown across the continent, is that this is an example of how this stuff can actually work in real life to make people's lives better day to day.
Would you also say, is it fair to say that stablecoin use cases are probably better suited for emerging markets rather than like, you and I transacting in stablecoins in the United States and we could be using Venmo or Zelle? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, 1,000%, right? The thing is, look, stablecoins are great, but if I'm in the US, I have a credit card that, not only works well, but actually pays me to use it at a restaurant, right? And so, you know, I just don't see stablecoins really taking over for that local use case, right? Look, I mean, even just to expound this out, right? I don't I don't see a world, and this is also, again, a lot of Bitcoin people on here, I'm sure. So, I don't want to ruffle too many feathers, but, I just don't see a world where Bitcoin, stablecoins, or any of this really replaces local payments. Right. I think it'll be a cold day in hell before you're walking into a coffee shop in Nairobi and you're paying for your latte with USDT or Bitcoin. Right. Like that's just not really a practical use case because local payments are so easy and pretty well solved everywhere in the world, right? You mentioned like, Zelle and Venmo and Cash App. In the US, we have credit cards, we have debit cards, we have, all these options. I don't even need to use cash, right? And it's the same in most parts of the world, right? If I'm in Kenya, I use M-Pesa for every transaction, right? It's mobile money. It works essentially the way that like Cash App works, right? Where I can go to any restaurant. They have, a number the same way that you have a phone number that I can, send you money on Cash App, and I can pay the restaurant using, mobile money with their till number, right? I can, do this for my taxi driver. I can do this for, anybody in the country locally, right? The moment that you try to go international, though, that's where the problem really kicks in, right? Is okay, well, who is accepting African currency on the other side, right? Most banks don't take African currencies, right? If you want to buy something on Amazon, they want dollars, right? They don't want African currency. They don't want, frankly, any local currency, never mind just the continent, right? And so that's where stablecoins, that's where this use case really shines, is the moment you need to cross a border, you need a solution that actually works the same way that local payments work, right? With that efficiency, the speed, the low cost, all of that, but can get the job done, right? And is acceptable to the person on the other side, which of course the dollar is.
So it's interesting that yellow card is being used so widely because I think, regulations are obviously a really important part of this story. And how did you get past those? Like, how did you say, okay, it's okay to use yellow card in this region and have it be legal?
Yeah, what I like to tell people is sort of from day one, we made a strategic decision that we wanted to be like Coinbase from a regulatory perspective, right? I think that Coinbase, when you look across the industry, Coinbase is one of those companies I think that's really, look, I'm not going to speak on their, current issues in the U.S., right? But has really followed the model of proactive regulation, right? Working with the government, trying to work with regulators, things like that. And so, that's what we've done across the continent, right? This is, number one, it's good for business because I don't think that it's actually feasible to operate at scale if you're sort of going around regulation or you're trying to avoid regulation or anything like that. I think that regulation is important for business across the board, right? In this industry or in any other industry. And so, what we've done is we've made sure that as we go country by country, as we're working, as we're expanding throughout the continent, that we actually work with the banks, we work with the governments, we work with the central banks, the ministries of finance, whoever it is that's the applicable regulator in each particular jurisdiction, to make sure that at a minimum they know who we are, they know that we're available, they know that we can come talk about this stuff, and we have insight and data and all of that. And sort of on the more extreme end, we've helped them with drafting regulation, right? We've helped them with opining on regulation and frameworks that they've put out. And so, that's something that our team has really taken a lot of pride in being able to do across the continent. And I think one thing that I'm very proud to report is when you look broadly across Africa over the last 2 years, there's been this massive sea change where now in all of the top markets for this technology, all of the top markets in terms of economies on the continent, period, are moving in a way that's friendly towards the industry, right? The SEC of Nigeria has put out guidelines for licensing. The SARB in South Africa has actually started issuing licensing. In Botswana, there's a formal license that's issued. In Zambia, they're accepting people into a sandbox. Rwanda has put out frameworks for sandboxing. Ghana has put out frameworks for regulation. The CMAC region has put out frameworks for regulation. And so there's there's so much to be excited about when you think about the regulatory aspect of this, because it's one of those it's sort of the first technology where the continent is really ahead of the curve when you look at the rest of the world in terms of regulating this, right? I think, again, I'm not going to opine too much on like US and sort of other countries' regulations, but, I think, the difference is pretty clear when you have, countries across the continent that are starting to issue licensing, that are, opening up frameworks for regulation and sandboxing and things like that, versus what's going on in other parts of the world.
Definitely. Yeah. I read an article recently about the SEC in Nigeria is now cracking down on unlicensed crypto exchanges. Was that what it was? But yeah, it just seems like there's a lot more regulations and clarity in that region versus other places. And it's interesting to see that also, because it seems like crypto use cases are actually really making an impact there versus in other regions.
100%, right? And the youth across the continent, look, obviously our team has done a lot of great work in, working with the regulators and trying to push for, friendly regulations and sort of explain the space and provide data and all of that. But I mean, it's really the youth of the continent that has pushed this forward, right? And this is a pure regulatory response to young people across the continent utilizing this technology, right? I mean, you have 1.3 billion people across Africa. The median age is 19, right? It's, I mean, by far the youngest continent in the world. And, the beauty of sort of growing up in the last like 10, 15 years is, obviously everybody has their own unique experiences. And I don't by any means mean to take away from that. But the last 10, 15 years, people around the world grow up a lot more similarly than they did, 30, 40 years ago because of the internet, right? We all grow up now watching the same videos on YouTube and, watching the same shows on Netflix and things like that, right? And so the world is, I mean, just so much more connected than it's ever been. And so, you have these new age technologies that, young people across the continent are really excited about and are utilizing, right? And I think the usage statistics speak for themselves.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that, because I feel like, crypto can be confusing. I spoke to a panel of people a few days ago. It was a virtual panel, and a lot of them were older, and they were so appreciative of what I said about crypto, but I think there was still a lot of confusion. So how easy is it to use Yellow Card in the regions where you can actually use it? I mean, can my mom use it? Like, how do people understand how to actually transact in stable coins?
Yes, we build with moms in mind, and so that's so hopefully the answer is yes. Yeah, I think when you think about education and things like that, and again, something that I probably differ from a lot of the industry on is, I think that people actually have a lot more to gain from the use cases of this technology and sort of the proliferation of this technology than they necessarily do from understanding the technology. And what I mean by that is, I'll give like a practical example, right? So like I use WhatsApp for basically everything in my day-to-day life, right? And WhatsApp is a pretty sophisticated encryption algorithm, right? SHA-256, and nobody can read it in between, and then it gets decrypted on either side when it gets there with keys and all of this, right? I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I fully understand how SHA-256 encryption works. What I know is that if there's one check mark, it hasn't been delivered. If there's two check marks, it's been delivered, and when it turns blue, that means you've read it. Right. And that's all I need to know. I don't actually need to understand how the encryption technology behind it works for me to benefit from the use of a private messenger. And so I think, I take a similar sort of approach and stance with crypto and with stablecoins, right? Where obviously the education piece of it is important. Everybody should, learn more about this technology. They should understand this technology, all of that, right? I'm also sort of a realist that, most people don't actually care. They just want their problem solved, right? Like the average person, again, 1.3 billion is a lot of people, right? The average person across the continent doesn't necessarily care how Bitcoin works or how stable coins work. They care about, can I make a payment with it? If I do this work online, can I get paid with it? Right? Like those are the problems that are really pressing on people. And so, we do a lot of work sort of on both sides, right? So we have an initiative that we call the Yellow Card Academy, where we do, number one, we have, on staff, local writers, authors, et cetera, that have built and how do you say, developed content specifically designed for local audiences, right? I mean, everything from like basic financial literacy, how do you save on an irregular income, all the way up to, what is Uniswap and how does DeFi work, and things like that, right? And sort of everything in between. And so, we have all of this content available for free online. We also do quite a number of in-person financial literacy tours, right? Talking about, again, basic financial literacy, but also stablecoins and how this works. And we sort of spend time on both sides, right? We want to make sure that people understand the technology and have the opportunity to understand the technology. But we spend a lot of time as well on just, what does this do for you? Right? Like, why should you learn about this in the first place? Right? Like, yeah, that's great. You're coming, you're teaching me about this thing that you say is just as cool as the internet. But like, what does that do for me? How does this help my family? Right. And again, I think this goes back to the practicality of the use case, right? People across the continent are just very practical, right? They want their problem solved. They want to be able to, help their family and, feed their kids and do this and do that. And so, yeah, I think, it goes back to not just trying to explain to somebody a really complicated technology, but also making sure that they understand how they can benefit from this, regardless of their level of understanding of it.
Definitely. Um, do you have any stories that you can share with us of just real world use cases that, has someone come up to you and said, "Hey, Chris, you really helped me. I use Yellow Card and this is how you've helped me." Do you have any stories like that that you can share with us just so the listeners can get an idea about like the impact here?
Yeah, I mean, the best one that I can think of is, there are a number of people that we hear from where they were able to start a business and are now, sort of on that path to financial independence and, charting their own future and things like that because of the power of this technology, right? So there's, one guy in particular that I, enjoy his story, right? He is a big fan of anime. He's a big fan of like Japanese media, things like that, right? And he sort of had this club and talked with other people locally in Nigeria that are also fans of this stuff, and put all this together. And at the same time, he's working multiple jobs. He's sort of selling whatever he can find. He's kind of bouncing around employment, trying to find something. Look, unemployment is a huge issue across the continent, right? I mean, in some countries, it gets as high as 50% in places like Congo, right? And those are going off the official numbers, which I think even in the U.S., sometimes they have a hard time believing the official numbers, right? And so it's not easy to just find a job, right? Everybody kind of needs to hustle. Everybody needs to sort of chart their own path, figure out their own way of doing it. And so this guy found a supplier in China that produces, consumer goods related to Japanese media. He would bring them in, sell them locally. The thing is, though, is when you're, importing from China, you need dollars, and when you sell locally, you're getting paid in naira. You're getting paid in, whatever local currency it is that you have in your country. And so, there was just no business case here for him, even though there was demand. It's not a demand issue, right? It's not even a supply issue. It's purely a payments issue, right? The demand is there, the supply is there, but how do you bridge that money from point A to point B? And so, this guy now has his own company. He's able to, pay himself. He, works for himself, and he's able to feed his family, right? He's able to support not just himself, not just his immediate family, but aunts, uncles, cousins, right? I mean, the number of people, you know, on the continent that are supporting, 8, 9 family members is mind-boggling. I think for a lot of sort of Western audience. And so these jobs and the ability to sort of you know have that financial freedom is extremely important to individuals across the continent. And so those are the types of stories that I think really touch me. Is it's like this guy is able to build his business because of this technology, right? He's finally able to solve that payments gap and make that happen. And so I love stories like that, right? I mean, look, you hear stories all the time about like, somebody was able to pay their medical bills on time, right? Somebody was able to get money from a family member overseas fast enough that they don't get kicked out of the hospital because they don't have the money to pay. People being able to pay school fees for their kids, going to school, going to boarding schools, going to schools, in other parts of the world. There's so many sort of examples of it, right? I mean, even down to like some of the food companies that we work with that are feeding the continent and that are now able to actually support the the import of food, right? Only 2 countries in the African continent are able to feed themselves with current production levels. And so the other 52 are desperately trying to facilitate these imports.
Yeah, it's interesting. Can you explain the process? So when a transaction takes place using a stablecoin on Yellow Card, how do those people, do they sell it and then do they receive their currency just like we do in the US using Coinbase?
Yeah, so what I like to tell people is we solve the hardest part of the problem, which is going from African currency into stablecoin or stablecoin into African currency, right? We then work with we have a great relationship with like Coinbase and Tether and various different exchanges and desks and that kind of thing for the leg on the other end, right? So if you need dollars on the other end, well, great, Coinbase can help with that, right? And we can get you those dollars through Coinbase. Circle can help with that, Tether can help with that. These various different exchanges and everything in different parts of the world can help with that, right? And so that's again, that's the power of stablecoins, is that liquidity, right? I mean, 130 billion dollars in market cap just for Tether, and 30-40 billion dollars a day in transactions, right? So I mean, plenty of liquidity, plenty of volume, a lot going on, all of that. And so once you have that stable coin, it's very easy for you to then get into the dollar, get into the currency that you need.
Yeah, definitely. Just curious, I feel like stable coins are having a moment right now, and they've always been really useful, but I feel like now everybody's talking about stable coins. The XRP stable coin, what are your thoughts? What's it called? Is it called RXRP? I forget the official title of that XRP
I
stable
don't
coin.
remember what they're calling it. I know that they were not calling it RUSD because they said that sounds too Russian. So
Okay,
I know
okay.
that that's not the name. I don't remember what they ended up landing on. Yeah, but I think look, I will. I mean, I'll give you my pretty blunt analysis of like Ripple and I mean even like PayPal and some of these other companies that have come out with stable coins more recently. I think that these guys are actually in a really good position insofar as they are able to integrate their stablecoins into their existing payment network and payment rails. Right. I think that what's really powerful about Ripple is it has this payment network and sort of payment rails around the world. And when you introduce a stablecoin into that, as opposed to like, a native currency like XRP, where there's volatility and the price goes up and down, you start to get a lot more demand on the payment side, right? Like, yeah, it's like I want to use those rails, but I don't want, my money to be worth less when it arrives. I don't want any fluctuations. I don't want to have to hold my money in something that's volatile. This is the same thing that we saw across Africa, right? The reason that USDT became so dominant is because it was all Bitcoin. People were using Bitcoin for all of these transactions. And then Bitcoin fees started going up, right? It became more difficult to send Bitcoin and have it confirm instantly, and it became more expensive. Also the volatility, right? And then Tether around the same time, Tether did what I think is sort of the smartest thing that's happened on stablecoins to date, right? And I think obviously again, I think some of these companies are in a good position to do some really smart moves. But one of the smartest things that's happened sort of in stablecoins to date was Tether making a lot of liquidity available on Tron, which I think the Tron blockchain gets a lot of flack, but the reality is that it's cheap, and if all I'm doing is paying you, then it doesn't really matter like as long as my payment gets there, it doesn't really matter, right? Like what I have like 3 seconds of risk, right? Do it, while I'm waiting for that payment to confirm. And so, now you have more liquidity for USDT on Tron than you do on Ethereum. And that's largely driven by Africa and South America, right? Where people want just a lower cost, they want an affordable way of being able to send money from point A to point B.
That's so interesting that you say that, because I didn't realize how important that is for emerging markets. I know that there's USDT on Tron. I've actually had to experience that myself, which for me, it was very difficult because I'm in the US and I don't think it's fully supported. I don't, by all these exchanges here, but
Yeah, Tron's not super well proliferated in the US. Yeah.
right. But in emerging markets, and it is cheaper, and that's why people would want to send those transactions on Tron. And interestingly enough, Chris, I just read this today. You probably heard about this about Tron and Tether starting that compliance program where they're looking for illicit activity on the Tron blockchain with USDT, because I think it's gaining so much popularity that now they're starting to really like watch it and make sure that, the transactions are legal and not illicit. So that's really interesting. It all kind of goes together. It all clicks in my mind now, thanks to you.
Yeah. It's the thing is like Tron was the first low cost blockchain to really go all in on that on USDT support, and vice versa, right? Tether went all in on Tron as sort of the low cost blockchain. And again, as a result, there's more liquidity there than there is on Ethereum, right? Everybody thinks of stable coins as sort of being utilized on Ethereum. That's just really not the case in practice, right? And a lot of this goes back to at the time Ethereum fees spiked up, right? You had sort of the scaling issues and those kind of things, and it was $50 to make a $5 transaction, and nobody I'm not going to pay that, never mind anybody in very cost sensitive countries, right? And so Tron by comparison at the time was what, 2 cents, 3 cents to make a transaction, and so it was sort of a no brainer for people. And again, as people are using it, it's the chicken and the egg, right? As people are using it, then it becomes more prolific. Exchanges start to integrate it, and all of a sudden you see it all over, right? And so it's really taken off on Tron as a result. And I think it's mostly emerging markets that that you really see that use in.
Yeah, definitely. I'm happy to see that. I know Justin Sun, and I'm just happy to see that Tron is really taking off now. I mean, that blockchain has been around for years.
Yes, yeah.
So good to see some use cases on it that are really impacting the world. Chris, so I've been asking you a number of questions. Are there any additional comments that you want to add that I might have overlooked that you want our listeners to know about?
Oh man. Well, if any of y'all are doing business on the continent, we'd love to help out. We also, we also help businesses that want to enter the continent. We've done, a lot of work with Coinbase. We've done a lot of work with Block and a number of other great institutions, helping them actually do more on the continent, getting them access to the rails, getting them access to the local payment networks and things like that they need. And so, yeah, we help sort of both sides, right? We help companies that are operating on the continent. We also help companies enter the continent. And I think the big thing that I would say is if you're not currently doing business in Africa or looking at doing business in Africa, you're already behind. And so now is the time to catch up, right? This is the fastest growing economies in the world, the fastest growing middle class, the fastest growing population, the fastest growing consumer class. This is a booming population. Like I said, 1.3 billion people, median age of 19, right? A population that's going to, double by 2050, right? Lagos is going to be the largest city in the world at the end of the century. And so it's, this is the time to invest in the continent. This is the time to hire on the continent. This is the time to, bring jobs, bring opportunity, bring investment to the continent. And if you're not looking there, you really should be.
Definitely. One final question, Chris. Will Yellow Card expand to other regions? I know Chainalysis just released a report about stablecoins being used in emerging markets, and there are other regions that were mentioned. So will Yellow Card expand? Is it Yellow Card just in Africa right now?
Yeah, we're just in Africa, having way too much fun on the continent, and so I don't know. It'd be hard pressed. I would need a compelling argument that I'm going to have more fun in another part of the world than I'm currently having in Africa, which is a pretty great place. So, we'll see. I think a lot of our expansion effort is focused on the continent, right? I think we're really good at what we do locally, and we want to continue to do that locally, right? I think look, there's 30 more countries on the continent that we haven't serviced, and so it's, I think, important for us, and a big part of our mission, that we make this technology accessible all across the African continent before we start getting distracted and go at other places and things like that, right? So look, we have great partnerships, again, with Coinbase, and obviously in the US, and then other exchanges in other parts of the world that are doing similar things to what we're doing in those parts of the world. So we have great partnerships to help enable people to be able to send money to these parts of the world, and vice versa, for them to be able to, move money into the continent, invest in Africa, things like that. But no, having way too much fun in Africa for us to possibly go anywhere else.
Yeah, no, well, I'm happy to hear that. Also, I feel like just getting involved with the regulatory side of things in other region. I mean, this isn't like easy stuff. It's not like, oh, I want to expand and go over to Brazil. I mean, I feel like you need to really understand the rules and regulations there in order to be successful. And so I think what you're doing in Africa is great.
Yes, yeah. I think the regulatory piece is something that every company in the space needs to consider. And so as you think about operating in various different parts of the world, you have to consider that, right? Like, these countries, even in Africa, like Botswana and Nigeria have, probably less in common than like Italy and, France, right? I mean, so, it's a very diverse and just big continent, right? I mean, it's just a huge place. And so there's so much going on that we're dealing with on the continent. I could not imagine trying to do that, but then also trying to sort of develop a new network and a new level of expertise and new language skills and things like that to go into, South America or something.
Yeah, cool. Awesome, Chris. Well, this has been a really fun talk. Like I said, we met last week in person in San Francisco. You blew me away. You're just so impressive. And any final thoughts, or if our listeners want to follow you, are you on Twitter X?
I'm on X. I'm on Instagram. I'm on everything. It's just my name. I'm around, just trying to make you proud. So doing the best we can.
Cool, Chris. Well, thanks again. This has been wonderful, and I hope to catch you in person in Africa soon. We talked about that documentary, so let's make it happen.
Oh, it'll be great. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Bye. Special thanks to 4Labs Digital for producing Web3 Deep Dive podcast. I'd also like to thank the sponsors behind Web3 Deep Dive. You can click the links in the show notes to learn more about each of the Web3 initiatives from these sponsors. Finally, thanks to the listeners for tuning in. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and share. I'll see you guys next time.